Footage of the draft has been reviewed by magicians looking for sleight of hand, but found results to be inconclusive.
What? Why the would I believe a magician?
There are people that complain about the subject of today's video to this very day. The 1985 NBA lottery. Now you might be asking yourself, hey Piggy, you are the master of virginity. What are you doing watching footage of the NBA draft from 1985? Well, believe it or not, there's actually a lot of controversy surrounding this particular lottery in that they think that this was completely rigged. Now in this video, I'm not going to talk about the history behind it as to why they would rig it. My job as a virgin magician is to examine the footage and determine if there was magical trickery afoot. You see, as a professional virgin, there are many times in a show where we might want to have a participant reach inside what they think is a shuffled vat of envelopes, where they think they freely pick one, and of course, maybe we predict ahead of time that we knew what decision they were going to make. This is something that's commonplace in the world of magic, and especially mentalism, which is fake mind reading using magic tricks. So this would be directly up my area of expertise. Now this does mean that I am ignoring certain things like auditing groups behind the scenes that were in charge of making sure that everything was as legitimate as possible. But again, that's not my job, baby. My job is only to examine the virginity. And of course, using the full extent and the rigor of the fact that I've never seen a woman naked, I'm gonna go through alternatives that they could have used to potentially cheat the lottery as well. I had to write notes down because this is going to be intense in terms of how we analyze the actual events of the draft itself. For any of you guys that follow the NBA, you know that David Stern is actual garbage. Just a grotesque sleazeball. But we're not here to talk about the content of his character. We're here to talk about the envelopes. Now the procedure is fairly simple. What we have are 7 envelopes that are ostensibly mixed and thrown in a tumbler. This tumbler is then spun, and David Stern reaches in and grabs one of these envelopes. Now, one little bit of backstory here is that this envelope had to be the New York Knicks. There are several factors that would make that a very advantageous decision for everyone. So the selection had to be the New York Knicks. Now, from what we know in studying the footage, the 4th envelope placed inside of the tumbler is the New York Knicks. One of the many theories is that if you notice, the person that is inserting the envelopes hits the New York Knicks against a metal bar inside of the tumbler. It's been determined that there's a very clear and evident mark or a bend on the envelope itself. And people think that David Stern used this to pick out the New York Knicks envelope from the actual tumbler itself. And as you can see from this footage, David Stern reaches in, grabs a couple envelopes, flips them over, picks one out, and that happens to be the envelope containing the New York Knicks. Now, as a magician, I look at this particular conspiracy theory and say that it's retarded. Whenever we try to come up with things for our shows, whenever we're trying to come up with tricks, we want them to be 100% guaranteed. So if you think that there was some sort of brainstorm meeting where somebody said, I know what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take the envelope and smash it against the bar as I put it inside, that's not necessarily something that would fly. He could have easily made it look awkward. He could have easily missed the bar. There are 100 different things that could have happened. So as a method, this is something that unfortunately I'm going to have to rule out. The tumbler itself could cause bends in the envelopes themselves. Notice that they're freely being tossed around in the actual tumbler, so that itself could also bend corners and make the envelopes marked in certain ways. Now, we are going to get back to this a little bit later because I do think that this could have been a happy coincidence. However, as an actual method of rigging this particular lottery, I would say it's not really good. Now, here's the thing. That's not to say that bending corners is not a good method. In the world of magic, for example, with card tricks, this happens to be my missing piece deck of playing cards, which is now live on Kickstarter. And of course, if you're interested in playing cards, the campaign funded to 53% in less than a week, which I think is fantastic. So if you want to support my work, I suggest you check it out. But in the world of magic, we know them as crimps, where you might have different bends in the card so that now we know its position in the deck. Now, if we have, for example, 7 cards and we decide to mix them up, all we'll be looking for is the card that has a bend. Now, this card is going to stand out when held in a packet. You could easily cut to it. You could easily find the card through pretty much no sleight of hand. So a bend or a crimp is something that we have used in Magic. Now, a bend necessarily would be a little bit too obvious, but a slight bend in the card itself, not the corners, would be something used in Magic fairly often. However, here I have to say that it's pretty dumb because you're implying that he had to hit the envelope on the bar in order for it to bend, which, as you could see, that's what causes the bend that's later discovered on the envelope, and that method is a little bit too risky. The other notorious method of marking the envelope that we've seen throughout the history, if you're someone that's familiar with this particular lottery, is the frozen envelope. The contention is that the envelope was placed in a freezer or some place where it's extraordinarily cold, and then right before the actual lottery, this was placed among the other ones and then placed inside the tumbler, spun, and picked. Now the logic being that because one envelope is colder than the others, then guess what? That's the one that's going to be the easiest to pick. Even from the comment section of this particular video, you could tell that a lot of people still believe this. And this has to be probably the most retarded thing I've ever heard in my life. Freeze a fucking envelope and go ahead, take one, put it in your freezer, leave it there for a month, take it out and put it among other envelopes and see if you could find it. Now I want you to take it out and of course put it in the middle of other ones, immediately dissipating its heat and then almost being impossible to find because it's going to make the other envelopes colder. So you're not going to be able to determine which one is a frozen envelope because the other ones are going to be cold by the fact that they're touching. So this theory is something that will never be used in the Magic world, nor would it ever be used to rig the 1985 NBA lottery. And if you think that, you're just, I can't even, I'm just shaking out of anger. Now another thing that people tend to use is the fact that David Stern is staring at the tumbler and people are thinking that he's using this in order to find which one and track is the correct envelope. Fucking dumb. I challenge you to get a group of envelopes, put it inside of a tumbler, and try to find the one that you want. And use this as a viable method in order to pick out the correct envelope. It's impossible. You can't account for the spinning of the tumbler. You can't account for the speed in which he's going to rotate the tumbler. Maybe the envelope loses your sight for a fraction of a second, and now guess what? You have no idea where the envelope is. So that as a method, not something necessarily anyone would rely on. Now, with that being said, now here are a couple different ways that they could have actually rigged it using Magic means. Now, thinking about the conditions of the actual draft itself, we're limited in terms of methods. Normally, I would say just have a bunch of envelopes and then switch for the correct one using a little bit of distraction, a little bit of misdirection. But here, all the eyes are looking right at David Stern as he picks up that envelope, so there's no way to switch it. Now, one thing that you could do is that you could actually just have the cards all be the same. So what that means is that you have each and every single envelope containing one that says New York Knicks. Now, here's the thing. Obviously, that's not going to work because you're going to need to remove them and show the fact that the other ones are the other subsequent drafts. A possible solution is that you have them be double-sided. So what that means is that one side of each and every single draft pick is the New York Knicks and the other side is a different team. Now, if you notice, there happens to be stickers on each envelope, so you could very easily determine which side to take it out and show the actual draft pick. That's a viable method and something that would work in the context of a magic show because the magician is the one that would be in charge of taking them out and showing them to the audience, and of course he would be very clever not to show the back. As you could see from the footage here, it's evident that the back of the actual card itself that contains the New York Knicks is not double-sided, but this would have been a good alternative had they been thinking using magic ways. I did mention the sticker. There's a sticker on the back of each and every single one of the envelopes. What's to say that the one that contains the New York Knicks is not slightly moved in one way or another? What this means is that now, guess what? You are marking the envelope, because by looking for the one that has a sticker that's in a different placement, well, guess what? Now you know that that's the one that contains the New York Knicks. Some people would suggest to turn the sticker completely around, but that would be a little bit too obvious. So what you could do is you could just move the placement of the sticker. That's it. Just move it. And with that, you can now know that that one is the one that belongs to the New York Knicks. Now, one thing to note here as well is the speed in which David Stern removes the envelope from the actual vat itself. Keep in mind that he has been staring at it in this entire tumble. However, it's very impressive. If there was a marking on the envelope, the speed in which he reached in, grabbed the correct one, and removed it. Whether or not the envelope is marked somehow with the sticker or a bent corner or a marking that's going to differentiate it from the other envelopes, he reaches in, grabs a couple, flips it over, and pulls the right one without hesitation. When magicians do this, they mix them up a little bit more. And in that mixing, usually they do that to find the right one, and then they pull it out. Here, there's none of that. He goes in, flips a couple over, and pulls it out without any hesitation. Now, with that being said, there is something known as advantage play in the world of gambling cheats. Advantage play is exactly what it sounds like, in that you are taking advantage of circumstance. So there might be something that you notice on the card that be able to differentiate it from another one. For example, let's say you're playing poker. Maybe in the context of dealing the cards, you notice that a card is slightly bent in a way that, well, makes it noticeable from other cards. Well, now you are using advantage play, because you know that if you see that mark or that bend, you know that that's the card, and therefore you should bet in a certain way. So what's to say that in this particular circumstance, David Stern was using advantage play? So what's to say that he didn't take advantage of the fact that maybe he knew the envelope was in a fourth position? As he tumbled, maybe he's just looking to see if he could track it. If he can't, well, he can't, but if he can, why not try? And of course, if the envelope is bent. So another possibility is that he could just be using advantage play. He could be using the natural environment around him, the tumbler itself, maybe knowledge that was a little bit nefarious of the placement of the envelope, but using that in order to best try to up his odds of picking the right envelope. So based on looking at the footage, based on all the potential conspiracies, I would say that it is possible that it was cheated. However, the odds are that they weren't. My factors are the speed in which he grabbed the correct envelope. My other factors are the ridiculousness of hitting the actual metal bar with the envelope as a method. The tumbler itself could cause bends in the envelopes themselves. The only thing that I could think of as a method here that's viable and usable is advantage play. But as far as sleight of hand, as far as rigging or things like that, as a professional virgin, I gotta say, there's none here. Now do keep in mind that this is one of 7. It's entirely possible that just by mere chance alone, he picked the correct envelope. Now, right as he reaches into the tumbler, David Stern lets out a huge sigh. People have said and speculated that this is because he's so nervous from cheating. But I think it's because he's a huge nerd. This guy's never been around this circumstance before. It's the first time they have an event of this stature. And obviously there's a lot riding on it. So with a huge sigh, myself, unfortunately in this video, I have to say that David Stern in this instance doesn't seem to be a complete scumbag. That's not to say that his policies and his rules and his implementation of certain things in the NBA don't make him a complete scumbag, which he is. But in this circumstance, he's not a scumbag. Usually at the end of my videos, I like to give a little bit of advice just to make sure that you leave the video with something that you could take into your regular life. I like to improvise these with things in my environment, like usually all the socks. I have cockroach killer here. This is something that unfortunately living in Miami, Florida, and living on the ground floor, what happens is that because it's outrageously hot outside, the bugs tend to move inside. So what I like to do is use this, which has a perimeter and removes any sort of insects being available to your vicinity for the next 12 months, according to the propaganda on it. I like to just spray the perimeter and make sure that no cockroaches are in my vicinity. Personally, I've mentioned this before on live streams, but I'm the Hitler of cockroaches and ants. I don't think they provide anything to the planet. Yes, you can make an argument for bees. Yes, you can make an argument for other bugs. But ants...
I see you again. When 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 I see you again.